kami mempersiapkan untuk generasi yang ingin menjadi tenaga pengajar, seperti Fakultas Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan, program studi bimbingan konseling, kesehatan masyarakat Indonesia adalah hal yang utama. Kami dengan jurusan Fakultas Kedokteran selalu mengembangkan ilmu kedokteran melalui program studi pendidikan kedokteran, Fakultas Teknik, program studi teknik mesin, program studi teknik elektro, program studi teknik sipil, program studi arsitektur, Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik, program studi hubungan internasional, program studi ilmu komunikasi, program studi ilmu politik, kami mempersiapkan tenaga yang ahli dan siap terjun untuk masyarakat Indonesia. Dengan program diploma Fakultas Vokasi, program studi fisioterapi, program studi perbankan dan keuangan, program studi keperawatan, program studi manajemen pajak,
Kami menyadari bahwa metode pembelajaran berbasis teknologi menjadi suatu hal yang harus dikembangkan, khususnya di Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Dengan dukungan teknologi tinggi, UKI mempersiapkan diri menjadi universitas berskala internasional yang bermutu, mandiri, dan inovatif di bidang tridharma perguruan tinggi. UKI menerapkan paradigma pendidikan Merdeka Belajar, Kampus Merdeka, yang sesuai dengan karakter masyarakat Indonesia. Kami siap melayani mahasiswa menjadi generasi yang unggul, yang memiliki nilai-nilai rendah hati, berbagi peduli, disiplin, profesional, bertanggung jawab, dan berintegritas.
Kami selalu ada untuk kemajuan generasi bangsa Indonesia dengan menerapkan pendidikan berstandar internasional di era digital. Karena kami datang untuk melayani.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, damai sejahtera, Om Santi Santi Om, nama budaya, salam kebajikan, peace be upon you, namaste. Good afternoon, and we are delighted to welcome you again to the second day of the third International Conference on Science and Education, ICES 2021, with the theme Research and Education Sustainability Post-COVID-19 in Asian Context. Let's give a round of applause for the second day of ICES 2021. After successfully holding our first day of ICES 2021, Teacher Training and Education Faculty, Universitas Kristen Indonesia, is now holding the second day of ICES. This event is held in partnership with Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology of Republic of Indonesia and organized by Universitas Sarjana Wiyata Taman Siswa Yogyakarta and Universitas Prima Indonesia. With me, Angela, again for the Master of Ceremony for this international conference. We thank God for His holy blessing that we are all in good condition to join our second day of ICES. And thank you so much for your participation for the parallel sessions. We thank our parallel session moderators and the presenters, as well as the participants for the great and beneficial session. We are also delighted that we have presenter participants who are lecturers, researchers, and practitioners from some different countries and institutions. Well, before we continue to our next agenda, I would like to welcome our excellencies and distinguished guests, Rector of Universitas Kristen Indonesia, Dr. Daniswara Kaharyono SH MH MBA, Vice Rector for Academic Affairs of Universitas Kristen Indonesia, Dr. Wilson Rajaguguk MSc MA, Dean of Teacher Training and Education Faculty, Universitas Kristen Indonesia, Dr. Andes Sunarto M. Hum, Vice Dean of Teacher Training and Education Faculty, Universitas Kristen Indonesia, Mr. Roni Gunawan, SPD, MPD, MTH, Head of the Study Programs of Teacher Training and Education Faculty, Universitas Kristen Indonesia, all distinguished guests, keynote speakers, invited speakers, presenters, and honorable participants of the second day of the third International Conference on Education and Science. This international conference is held to respond to the ideas of alternative solutions to educational problems, especially the research and education in Asian context. We expect some inputs from education and experts to respond to the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. Well, before we continue, let me announce some of the important informations. All participants have to join this international conference from the beginning until the end to get the e-certificate, and don't forget to fill the attendance list shared by the committee. All the participants are suggested to use the microphone properly and turn on your camera along the sessions. If there are some questions, you may write down your questions in the chat box of the Zoom meeting as well as in the online session from FKIP website. Please turn off your camera if you are doing some personal activities. And for all of the participants, you may join this conference by streaming on official UKI Jakarta YouTube channel, FKIP UKI Hebat YouTube channel, and live.fkipuki.org. You may also download the plenary talks material in our website, live.fkipuki.org. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is such an honor for us to have a keynote session with our honorable speaker, His Excellency Rector of Universitas Kristen Indonesia, represented by Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Wilson Rajaguguk, MSc MA. The floor is yours.
Baik, terima kasih untuk kesempatan yang sangat baik ini. Pak Dekan, terima kasih banyak untuk kesempatan. Bapak Moderator, ini ada interpreter ya? Dan keluarga besar Fakultas FKIP UKI, saya sungguh berbahagia boleh ada di sini pada siang hari ini, mewakili Pak Rektor menyampaikan keynote speech yang berjudul Research and Education Sustainability Post COVID-19, kompetensi, kurikulum, dan pembelajaran online. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, teman-teman, dimanapun berada yang mengikuti konferensi ini, izinkan saya menyampaikan beberapa poin penting dari keynote speaker pada siang hari ini. Yang pertama adalah problem terbesar dari pembelajar, dari mahasiswa pada masa mutakhir ini. Mahasiswa pada saat ini sedang dipersiapkan untuk lingkungan yang tidak dapat ditebak, diduga. Pekerjaan yang bahkan belum ada. Harus menggunakan teknologi yang belum ditemukan. Dan juga menyelesaikan persoalan yang belum diketahui apakah persoalan itu belum sudah ada. Jadi masa depan itu sangat-sangat tidak terduga persoalannya, dan bagaimana mengatasinya kita belum menemukan. Itulah yang dihadapi oleh Universitas Kristen Indonesia saat ini. Bagaimana UKI harus meresponnya? Bagaimana UKI merespon persoalan studi, persoalan mahasiswa, persoalan kependidikan, dan persoalan pendidikan pada masa ini? Jawabannya adalah mengembangkan kompetensi alumni Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Universitas Kristen Indonesia harus merespon dan mempersiapkan alumninya untuk menghadapi persoalan-persoalan tadi. Apa itu kompetensi? Kompetensi itu lebih dari sekedar pengetahuan dan keahlian vokasional. Kompetensi melibatkan kemampuan untuk menemukan permintaan yang luar biasa kompleks. Dengan menggambarkan dan memobilisasi psikososial, sumber-sumber psikososial, termasuk pengetahuan dan perilaku dalam konteks tertentu. Seperti contoh, kemampuan untuk berkomunikasi secara efektif merupakan sebuah kompetensi yang dapat digambarkan, diterjemahkan ke dalam kemampuan bahasa seseorang. Kemampuan IT dan perilaku terhadap ini, bagaimana dia mengembangkan kemampuan komunikasinya. Memang saat ini Jepang sudah mengembangkan Society 5.0, ujung-ujung dari kemampuan ini adalah keterampilan ini adalah kemampuan untuk berkomunikasi. Saya coba tampilkan kerangka kompetensi yang dibutuhkan oleh pasar tenaga kerja pada abad ke-12 dalam gambar ini. Pertama-tama life and career skills, dan kemudian learning and innovation skills, dan digabung dengan information, media, dan teknologi. Dan ini merupakan core subject dari tema-tema pada abad 21. UKI harus menerjemahkan ini ke dalam kurikulum untuk mengembangkan alumni yang profesional. Tidak ada jalan lain. UKI harus berbenah diri dan menjadi bagian dari pengembangan peradaban. Bapak, Ibu, teman-teman yang kami hormati, saya boleh kelompokkan kemampuan tadi ke dalam 3 kelompok besar keahlian, keterampilan yang dibutuhkan dan berkembang pada abad ke-21 ini. Yang pertama adalah learning skills, yang kedua literacy skills, dan yang ketiga life skills. Ketiga-tiganya ini harus dimiliki oleh seseorang, warga masyarakat, warga dunia pada abad ke-21. Learning skill dimulai dan dilaksanakan melalui critical thinking, creativity, kolaborasi, dan komunikasi. Literasi skill harus menguasai informasi, media, dan teknologi. Life skill, flexibility, leadership, inisiatif, productivity, dan sosial. Ya memang, kita ini makhluk sosial, dan kemampuan itu berujung kepada keahlian sosial. Baik, saya teruskan. Pengembangan kompetensi pada abad 21 melalui pelibatan pola pikir, kerangka pikir. Dimulai dari pengingatan, remembering, pemahaman, aplikasi, menganalisis, mengevaluasi, dan menciptakan. Remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, dan creating. Ini piramida pengembangan kompetensi melalui pengembangan pelibatan pemikiran pada abad 12. Saya coba menampilkan ini dalam grafik yang lebih mudah. Tadi saya coba ulang lagi kembali. Dimulai dari remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, dan create. Disinilah kita menciptakan kurikulum yang harus kita bangun untuk membangun Universitas Kristen Indonesia pada bagian ini. Kemudian, Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, teman-teman para sahabat, pengembangan kerangka pikir tadi, kami coba menggambarkannya dengan taksonomi Bloom dan menggabungkannya dengan metode pelayanan online learning. Dimulai dari mahasiswa mempelajari modul, video, artikel, dan material pembelajaran yang lain. Kemudian mahasiswa kita minta untuk mengerjakan tes, kuis, berformat melalui learning management system yang sudah kita siapkan. Universitas Kristen Indonesia sudah mempunyai LMS ini. Kemudian mahasiswa kita minta mengerjakan simulasi, dan mahasiswa mengerjakan masalah, problem solving. Dan mahasiswa juga dikembangkan kemampuan untuk mengembangkan studi kasus dan memberi rekomendasi. Kemudian mahasiswa kita berikan kemampuan untuk mengerjakan proyek-proyek. Jadi sepadan dengan apa yang tertulis dari EOCD tadi, involving all thinking level in learning, itu selaras dengan taksonomi Bloom. Kita kembangkan. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, saya coba daftarkan di sini ya top 10 open courses di Amerika Serikat. Dimulai dari accessibility of learning dalam subjek pendidikan, ada kemudian dilanjutkan dengan introduction to complex number, matematik. Kemudian an introduction to data and information, engineering and computer science, dan art history. Menariknya kursus yang paling diminati di Amerika Serikat adalah termasuk sejarah seni. Kemudian basic human pathology, dilanjutkan dengan entrepreneurship dan modern poetry, nutrition and medicine, research and classroom teacher, dan the cell. Sangat menarik di tengah-tengah kemajuan teknologi saat ini. Kita bisa melihat dari kursus yang paling diminati itu ada art history dan modern poetry. Jadi manusia memang tetap kembali kepada harkatnya sebagai makhluk sosial. Baik Bapak Ibu, UKI sedang mengembangkan dan harus terus mengembangkan elemen pokok online learning. Jadi mau nggak mau UKI harus mengembangkan, membuat metode pelayanan online dan on-site, hybrid learning. Elemen pokok online learning kami coba kelompokkan ke dalam 4 kelompok seperti ini. Yang pertama mahasiswa. Mahasiswa harus didorong untuk sebagai pembelajar aktif, mempunyai IT skills, mahasiswa yang kolaboratif, dan mahasiswa yang komitmen. UKI harus mengembangkan kurikulum yang terorganisir dan terpadu dengan sistem IT. Kurikulum harus dikembangkan, tujuannya, kontennya, pengalaman, tools, alokasi waktu, dan evaluasi relevan dan terpadu. UKI sedang membangun bagian ini saat ini. Dosen itu tidak lagi seperti zaman saya kuliah, dosen itu sumber dari sumber material. Tetapi pada masa ini, pada masa abad ke-21, dosen adalah seorang manajer, fasilitator pembelajaran. Dosen harus mempunyai kemampuan IT. Dan dosen itu harus menjadi komunikator yang baik. UKI sedang mengembangkan LMS, kompatibel dengan hakikat pembelajaran, user-friendly, sarana, bukan fokus pembelajaran, dan digaransi terus berfungsi. Kami di Universitas Indonesia sudah membangun ini saat ini. Coba kita lihat traditional and distance learning student di Australia, di sejumlah universitas di Australia tahun 2017 sampai 2018, kita lihat sudah terjadi presentasi yang sangat bagus, sangat besar dari distance learning di Australia. Gejalanya memang sudah terjadi sesuai dengan seperti apa dalam literatur yang kami sampaikan tadi. Jadi mau tidak mau perguruan tinggi harus mengembangkan pelayanan dalam bidang distance learning. Mau tidak mau perguruan tinggi harus memperbaiki metode pelayanan dengan menambah distance learning. Kurikulum UKI adalah kurikulum yang membuat UKI survive dan menjadi unggul. Jawabannya menerapkan pembelajaran hybrid learning. Hybrid learning itu harus dibangun untuk mengembangkan kompetensi pada abad 21. Indonesia yang mempunyai 3 zona waktu, demikian luasnya dari barat sampai ke timur, untuk membangun Indonesia, untuk menjangkau pendidikan di Indonesia, metode paling tepat saat ini adalah dengan menggunakan hybrid learning. Ada mahasiswa yang kuliah di UKI dan mengizinkan mahasiswa di luar UKI di mana saja di Indonesia ini mereka boleh belajar. Dan kita sudah melaksanakan itu pada saat ini. Bapak Ibu yang kami hormati, inilah bahan diskusi yang boleh kami sampaikan kepada kita pada siang hari ini. Akhir kata kami ingin mengakhiri keynote speech ini dengan Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita. Om Santi Santi Om, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Tuhan memberkati FKIP, Tuhan memberkati Universitas Kristen Indonesia, dan peradaban umat manusia. God bless for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency. Excellencies, distinguished guests, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are going to have our plenary talk In the second day of ICES 2021, with our invited speakers, Associate Professor Dr. Salah Trodi from the University of Exeter, United Kingdom, Professor Dr. Hendrik Freitag from Ateneo de Manila University, Philippines, and Associate Professor Brian de Denman, PhD, from University of New England, Australia, which will be moderated by Mr. Parlindungan Pardede, SSM from Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Let me read a brief introduction about him. Mr. Parlindungan Pardede is a senior lecturer at the English Language Education Department, Faculty of Letters and Languages, Universitas Kristen Indonesia, where he teaches language skills, research methodology, in English language teaching, literature, and cross-cultural understanding. He obtained his bachelor degree in English language and literature from Padjadjaran University, Bandung, and master degree in applied linguistics from Universitas Negeri Jakarta. He served as the Dean of Faculty of the Education and Teacher Training of UKI in 2014 to 2018. His research interests are reading and writing skills, literature in English language teaching, and blended learning. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Pardede. The time is yours.
Well, thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to the second plenary sessions of the third ICES 2021. In these sessions, we will have 3 presentations concerning 3 different topics, but which are very essential in higher education, especially post-COVID-19. Without further ado, please join me to welcome our invited speaker. First, let me introduce you to the first speaker, Dr. Salah Trodi, which unfortunately, due to certain circumstances, cannot present his topic live. So we are going to watch only the video he had prepared in order to get the ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, our second speaker is Professor Dr. Hendrik Freitag. Can Dr. Freitag say hello to the audience? Oh, okay. Yeah. Probably later, after the presentation of Dr. Salah, Dr. Freitag will stay quite long with us. And then after him, our third speaker is Brian D. Denman, PhD. Ladies and gentlemen, every presenter will talk in about 30 minutes. And after that, we will have around 15 minutes question and answers. And since we have a very limited time for each of the speaker, audience are welcome to write questions on the chat room. And then later, after finishing their talk, each speaker will answer their questions, except to Dr. Salah Trodi's presentations. But all of the questions will be collected by the committee, and then the questions will be sent to Dr. Salah Trodi to be answered. So, ladies and gentlemen, during the presentations, please feel free to write in the chat room, and then later we are going to say it and will be answered by each of the presenter one by one. Ladies and gentlemen, conducting research is unquestionably one of the duties of every lecturer. Unfortunately, research is still one of the big problems, especially to novice lecturers. In relation to this, our first speaker, Dr. Salah Trodi, will address the importance of developing clear and feasible research questions when designing a research study. In particular, he will discuss on different perspectives of developing research questions depending on the researcher's theoretical position and paradigmatic assumptions. Some examples of research will also be provided. Dr. Trodi is an associate professor at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Exeter, where he is the coordinator, he is the director of global engagement. He received his PhD from Florida State University, and his master's degree was received from Aston University, UK, and another master in English from the University of Tunis. His teaching and research interests include language teacher education, critical issues in language education, language policy, curriculum development and evaluation, and classroom-based research. Dr. Trodi is a doctoral supervisor advising research students in several areas in language education, language policy, TESOL, and applied linguistics. He is also the coordinator of the Doctoral Research Forum. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will expect that his presentation that we will watch through videos will inspire us and provide essential points about conducting research. Committee, you can play the video now.
So, as I mentioned in the introductory video, the purpose of this session is to look together at the position of research questions, what they are, how to develop them, and to what methodologies they will lead us. So in a research study, basically, or in a thesis, the questions will state and clarify the aims and objectives of the researcher. Okay. So it's through the research questions that people, when they read your study, they know your purpose. Okay. There are, of course, principles that are involved in designing research questions. A number of principles. Where do they come from? They either come from the assumptions the researcher makes about the world. We will look at that in the next slides, i.e. the views that the researcher has about the nature of the phenomenon they want to study. In education, for example, their views about what classrooms are, what pedagogies are. Those views would help people develop research questions and interests. And also a person's views about knowledge and the nature of knowledge. What is knowledge? What do they conceive to be this knowledge? Okay. These also might affect people, influence them in developing research questions. And these are part of the bigger picture. And I mentioned ontological, epistemological, methodological assumptions that the researcher makes. And briefly, the ontological assumptions are the researcher's views about the nature of the world we live in. Okay? Epistemological assumptions are the views the researcher has about the nature of knowledge. And the methodological assumptions are also the views and perhaps the knowledge a researcher has about how to conduct a study. These are some of the principles, major points of departure, not all, that perhaps will influence people in developing research questions. Following from the first slide, we come to the idea that researchers have agendas or purposes for their studies. The research questions, therefore, are there to reflect these agendas, and the reader will figure out this agenda through the research questions. And the idea also is that there are different ways of formulating what the researcher wants to do with the data that is collected. Here we're talking about studies that are based on data collected on the ground. And there are different situations or different scenarios for what actually the researcher would like to do with the data. And depending on what the researcher wants to do, i.e. their agenda, what they would like to do with the data once it's collected, those research questions would have to reflect that approach. So for example, one position for the researcher, and that's a study where the researcher would like to test a hypothesis, i.e. to confirm or reject a hypothesis. And by testing a hypothesis, the researcher is actually testing a theory. And here, for example, the researcher would like to see whether by introducing a particular approach to materials or to curriculum or pedagogy would have an effect on students' performance. And in this particular case, the research questions, often set in terms of hypotheses, would reflect that agenda. There is, of course, a different position for the researcher, which reflects yet a different agenda, and that's where the researcher would like to collect data and conduct a study in order to understand a particular phenomenon in schools, for example, in a particular social context, in classrooms, on the playground. Okay, they'd like to see what the participants in a particular social educational context would like to say about their experience, their views, their opinions. In this case, the research questions would, of course, reflect this agenda. There is a third and a different agenda, and that's where the researcher would like to ask questions, would like to conduct a study in order to effect a change, to improve a particular situation, to raise questions about certain issues in a particular context. And here the purpose is to make a difference and not only to understand a position. And for each of the above aims or agendas, these three, okay, different kinds of research questions are needed. In the 3 positions, the researcher also would like to describe a situation, so the description of a situation is necessary. This slide is about the factors that contribute to the choice and the development of a research questions. They are by no means all the factors, but in my view, they are some of the important sources of developing a research questions. Or to put it in other words, some of the factors that influence researchers in developing a research question. So the first one here, as you see, is the researcher's worldview, or their view of the world, in other words, the world of their studies in particular, and the world in general. And that particular worldview would, I think, affect the development or the direction of a research question. So for example, if a researcher believes that education is a matter of understanding and a process, and a matter of the quality of learning, the quality of teaching, and that's what matters, then perhaps the tendency will be to ask questions that fit that particular view of education. If, on the other hand, a researcher believes that education is about performance, is about evaluation, is about standards, is about levels, then the research questions would follow that particular view, would fit that view of education, looking for proofs, looking for evidence in education. So then again, the way you see the world of education will, in my view, influence the development of your research questions. Another source of research questions is where do they come from? They might come from your training, your teaching experience, your professional practice, the years. In some cases, some of our students have come to us from teaching experiences or from learning experience too, okay, from school experiences and what happens in the classroom, incidents, ways, memories, challenges that people meet in their professional practice might trigger an interest in a particular area of research. Another source perhaps would be psychological factors such as motivation, interest. People might be interested in a particular area or a particular topic, and from an area and a topic, a set of research questions might develop. People might have an intellectual interest in a particular area. Perhaps also another source is that a known problem in education, the nature of the problem that's happening around you, even though you did not experience particularly in your context, but it's a known, established, whether at the national level, at the local level, the problem imposes itself, and that might trigger interest in that particular problem, which would lead to research questions. Another source could be the literature. You will be reading, you have an interest, but you're reading different studies, theoretical and empirical literature, and out of that literature, an interest might come up, which might eventually lead to research questions. Audience or the context, what it is that people are interested in, is another also possible source of research questions. So sometimes researchers would do a study out of a need from a particular audience, students, lecturers, the community at large. In this slide, we look at one kind of research questions, and that is the interpretive and qualitative questions. And as the terms describe, an interpretive question reflects the purpose of the researcher, which is to understand and explore a social phenomenon. Say you would like to understand how teachers teach in the schools, how different learners of different ages, for example, or different social backgrounds learn at schools, whether languages or other subjects. And in general, it leads to what we call a qualitative question. In other words, the researcher is looking for opinions, ideas, experiences, narrative. As the term explains, it's quality, not quantity. So it's very typical that the data collected through these research questions would be in terms of ideas and narratives, expressions, for example. And one way of developing an interpretive research study, an interpretive question, is to start with one or two general, what we call tour, grand tour questions, and then follow these questions by a subset of questions, sub-questions that would narrow the focus for the researchers and perhaps go to specific points. And in this particular approach, the question can depend, as I said, on qualitative design that the researcher is using. There are a number of qualitative research designs, and you will look at that in the future in the rest of your courses. So, for example, you will read terms such as phenomenology or ethnography, and here the questions might be broad to start with, and perhaps starting with the research questions even without reference to existing literature in phenomenological study. So let's look at some examples of questions that fit this, what we call interpretive approach to research. And in general, these questions start with what, words such as what or how. And these two words do actually reflect the nature of the study that is planned. So for example, the following research questions: how do teachers cope with overload? And in this particular research questions, as you see, the researcher might have an idea about how teachers in general deal with overload, perhaps based on their own teaching experience. But the whole point is to understand from the teacher's point of view, from the participant's point of view, their own experiences. And of course, perhaps challenges and ways of dealing with it. So the question here is also a general question. The next one says, what professional development opportunities are available for primary school teachers? Again, here, the purpose behind the questions is to explore the nature of opportunities that are put at the disposal of teachers in a primary school setting in terms of professional development. And we're looking again for qualitative experiences, for qualitative data. Next, what learning challenges do students face when studying content subjects through a foreign language? And here, this is about learning experiences, and the researcher would like to understand the kind of difficulties experiences by students when learning a foreign language. And therefore, they might do interviews, but they will collect qualitative data again. They can also do other kinds of data, but in general, it's qualitative experiences we're after. Next, what support do teachers receive to do online teaching? This, as you know very well, especially in these times, teachers would need, or teachers necessarily need, a lot of support in order to work online and to prepare. So they'd like, the researcher here would like to understand what teachers go through and whether they get the necessary support, technical or pedagogical. Next, how do students interpret teachers' feedback on their essays? And this is in the area of writing. And in general, the researcher here would like to see what sense do students make out of the feedback that is provided on students' essay by their teachers. It is worth pointing out here again that a good research question, clear research questions, will help you establish a purpose for your study. So the reader, through the research questions, can clearly understand the whole agenda and what you're doing. Also, it's important that you explain what you're going to do with the research questions and with the data you collect. In other words, these research questions will lead you to different possibilities, different positions, but they are all in this particular school of thought qualitative and interpretive in nature. So for example, the research questions might lead you to discover experiences, ideas, and theorize, making good interpretations, creating a theory about how, your own theory, about how people go about in their daily lives, for example, in schools, in institutions, and so on. Do not worry about the terms in brackets in here. So, for example, grounded theory, ethnography, and the like, as you will see these and you learn about them as you progress with your course. And another position is to explain or seek to understand. Perhaps the purpose of a study, for example, through ethnography, you invest time in the study, and the purpose is to explain phenomena, social phenomena, educational phenomena. You might want to explore a particular process. You might want to do a case study, for example, and these are possibilities of methodologies of how you design the study. Also, one of the purposes is to describe experiences, perhaps through narratives, through phenomenology, and the researcher here, their point is to report how people live their lives, for example. Interpretive research questions, they evolve, they change during the study. The whole process is cyclical, is not linear. So it's common in qualitative research that you start with a set of questions to guide you at the beginning, but you go and collect data and then you review the questions and you might change them or add to them. In this slide, we move to a different kind of research questions, and that's the positivist questions. In this approach, the questions have a different purpose and also different wording from those we saw in the interpretive approach or the interpretive paradigm. Here, we use terms such as hypothesis, and I will explain in a second the meaning of a hypothesis and its position. When you're reading a journal, i.e. a research study published in a journal, you might see the term hypothesis or questions or objectives. Whatever the terms used by the researcher, in general, the purpose is for the researcher here to check whether a particular theory used through a hypothesis is true or not, and to, of course, try out something and make generalization in general from a sample to a whole population. Okay, so that's a general purpose. And in general, we're looking for what we call quantitative data, data that is represented in numbers using particular techniques that fit such objectives. So hypotheses, questions and objectives develop in general from theory and observations through the researcher's observations of a phenomenon or a particular theory. And then the theory gets tested. So questions in general here are testable propositions deduced from theory. You have a particular theory about, for example, how people learn, and then you want to see whether you want to check whether that theory stands. You develop a hypothesis, you state your hypothesis, and then you go about to the field and test that particular hypothesis. So these questions, as I said, they are testable. If it's not testable, therefore it's not a good research questions in this. So that's an important criteria, that the research question is testable. Hypothesis, okay, which is a declarative statement of the relationship between two or more variables. Okay? And in a study, there is more, in general, the minimum here is to have two variables. It's the effect, for example, studying the effect of one thing over the other, of one variable over the other. For example, the effect of motivation on scholastic achievement, the effect of school background on school background or family background on achievement, the effect of parental occupation on school orientation or school achievement, the effect of parental occupation on children's choice of science or arts, for example. These are examples of variables. So therefore, here we are after a predicted relationship, okay, of the expected answer, which is explained by propositions put forward by the researcher. This set of prepositions can be called a theory. So the theory explains, after you test, you can say, yes, the background of the children does affect their attainment or their success of schools or otherwise. By testing a hypothesis, the researcher, as I said, is in effect testing a theory. And to put it in, again, in other terms, the research question poses this relationship, but in a question form. So here we're talking at the technical or stylistic element of presenting a research question. And in the next slides, I will explain with examples the difference between a hypothesis and an objective and a research question. So here I illustrate through 3 examples the difference between the wordings of the hypothesis, research questions, and objective. All of them lead to the same thing. So the first one is a hypothesis. For example, primary school pupils receiving a one-on-one advisory meeting with the tutor per week will improve their grades in reading and vocabulary by 1 mark. Right? I'll go to the research question. A research question: what is the effect of receiving a one-on-one advisory meeting with tutor per week on primary school pupils' grades in reading and vocab? Notice that in the research question, stylistically, it is in the interrogative format. There is a question mark at the end, and it is stated as a question. The hypothesis is not stated in the style of a question. It's a statement. If you look at it, hypothesis 1, it's declarative. It tells you that there is an expected relationship between 2 variables here, and that's the students receiving an advisory meeting once a week and their grades in reading and writing. And the third case is the objective. Here, the researcher would like to use a different style and declare a purpose. The purpose of this study is to investigate, and look at it, the effect of receiving a one-on-one advisory meeting with the tutor per week on primary school pupils' grades in reading and vocabulary. So you see that in the third one, the use of the term investigate the effect of one variable, which is the actual meeting with the tutor, and the other variable, which we'll call the dependent variable here, because it depends on the meeting, and that is improving in the grades of reading and writing, say, by 1 mark. Okay. And 1 mark that is on a scale from 1 to 10, for example. When you start the study, the students are at a 5, and then after all of this meeting, we expect the students to go up to 6, for example, in reading and writing. Here are some more examples of hypotheses, questions, and objectives. So, for example, in hypothesis 2, it says EFL, which stands for English as a Foreign Language, intermediate writing students will improve their writing performance on their exit test by 30 points after a 1-month course of using a CAL writing software. CAL stands for Computer Assisted Language Learning. So in this one, the researcher basically is stating that there is a relationship between students' improvement in writing and the use, of a computer writing software. And of course, it's specified. They expect the improvement to be by 30 points, for example, on a particular test scale. The research question is stated in an interrogative format, and it says, what is the effect of using computer-assisted language learning writing software on the writing performance of EFL intermediate students? The objectives are stated as such. The purpose of this study is to investigate the effect of using a CAL writing software on the writing performance of EFL intermediate students. So this, as again I said, an example of a hypothesis, a research question, and objective within all the same study. I repeat that in a written research study, in a journal, in a published paper, for example, you are not necessarily going to find the three of these. Sometimes the researcher would only have a hypothesis, but sometimes the hypothesis is not stated as a hypothesis, but it is stated indirectly under a research question or objective. In this activity, I'd like people to look at hypotheses 1 and 2 above in the previous slides and identify the independent and dependent variables. As I said, in every study, there is a minimum of 2 factors or variables that the researcher is studying. And next is what research design you think can help the researcher answer the research questions. In other words, how can the researcher collect data to test the 2 hypotheses in the early slides? You can put your answers in the journal on ELI or in the forums, and then check what your colleagues upload them and check what your colleagues also think of. In the next 2 or 3 slides, we'll look at the types of hypotheses available for the researcher. So first, we start with the null hypothesis. And as the term says, null means nothing. So here, the statement of the researcher is to say that there is no relationship between one variable and another. And sometimes that's actually what the researcher would like to show or to prove in a study. So for example, the first one, there is no relationship between one-on-one meeting with the tutor and reading performance. Another example would be there is no relationship between computer-assisted language learning and reading performance. So here there is no direction. We're not saying that computers will affect the students either negatively or positively. Or we're not saying that a one-on-one meeting with a tutor will improve students' reading performance or actually make it worse. There's no direction. There's only a concept, which is reading or relationship. Why do you need a null hypothesis? Because a null hypothesis in its statement is saying that there is no relationship between variables. Either the researcher would like to establish that. So for example, everybody is saying using iPads, for example, in the literature or in society, or using computers will improve students' performance. But we're not really sure of that. So perhaps the researcher would like to show that it doesn't really make a difference whether a student uses a computer or not. What matters is reading comprehension, understanding, and performance. Okay. And so that's one important reason why you would use a null hypothesis. There are other reasons too. Another kind of a null hypothesis is the operational null hypothesis. And by operational, we mean that the researcher provides a clear and precise definition of the variables, the independent variable and the dependent variable. So, for example, in this case, the statement is there is no relationship between the number of hours students use reading texts in computer-assisted language learning activities and their ability to answer inference questions on a 500-word reading text. What this means is that the researcher is saying that they do not expect one variable to affect the other. They do not expect a relationship between the number of hours, for example, 5 or 6 hours that the students use reading texts in computer-assisted language classrooms or activities, to affect their ability of inferencing, okay, which is a skill in inference questions, on a 500-word reading text. So here, the definition of reading is precisely provided as the ability of the students to answer inference questions from how many words? A 500-word reading text. So there is a precision in the definition of the two variables. And that precision of the definition of the variables, we call it in research an operational definition. And that an operational definition is important for the reader to understand what it is that the researcher would like to study. Because when we say, for example, the effect of an activity of computers on reading abilities, we don't know precisely what type of reading activities or reading abilities, reading skill the researcher is studying. So in this particular case, we're not talking about reading for summaries or reading for pleasure or extensive, intensive reading. We're talking about the ability to answer inference questions on texts of 500 word length. So that's an operational definition, but of course we're saying that we don't expect a relationship between the two. In this case, you have the dependent variable is the ability to answer inference questions. The independent is the number of hours used in computer-assisted language activities. Here we have another example of hypothesis. It is the case of the literary alternative hypothesis. It is concept-oriented and directional. I'll explain what this means through this example. So here the statement is, the more students have access to computer-assisted language learning, the better they read. Another example would be students who have good access to facilities, for example, home facilities, would have better achievement. In general, there is no precision in the definition of the independent variable, which is access to call. We don't know what access means. Is it an hour a day, an hour a week, an hour a month? Is it access to call with support from teacher or without? So the concept is there, but there is no operational definition. Okay, and also we don't know what it means to read better. That means comprehension, answering reading tests. So again, there is no operational definition of the dependent variable here, which is the ability to read. So it's a hypothesis stated in general. You would like to have a more precise statement of hypothesis that is directional. We're saying here, the more you increase, for example, call, the better the reading, but you need operational definition, which is the case of the next slide. Here we have an example of an operational alternative hypothesis, whereby the variables are defined, precisely defined with a direction. So an example of the statement is, the higher the number of hours students spend reading texts in call activities, the higher their performance will be in answering inference questions on a 500-word reading text. So the researcher is expecting the effect to be in the direction of higher, i.e. the more you have hours of exposure to call, to computer activities, the higher the scores will be on a reading text. So both we have one direction, which is as A increases, B increases. In other words, as the independent variable increases, the more hours we have, so does the dependent variable. In other words, the more hours exposure would lead to higher scores on a reading text. So we have both precision in the definition of the variables, the nature of the variable. We're not saying just the more they read, this is the number of hours, and also will have better performance in reading on a test. So this is, as I said, an operational and directional hypothesis.
Okay, thank you to Dr. Trodi for the informative and interesting video. Unfortunately, due to our limited time, we cannot play the whole video. So everyone can download the video from the address you can see. You can ask the committee for it, or if you're mistaken, it has been also provided. The link has been also provided by the committee. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going now to listen to the second presenter. Our second presenter in this plenary session is Professor Hendrik Freytag. Dr. Freytag is now a full professor at the Department of Biology at Ateneo de Manila University. He received his doctorate degree from Martin Luther University Halle-Wittenberg, Germany in 2004, and master degree in 1999 from the same university. His research interests are taxonomy, systematic and ecology of freshwater arthropods, conservation, biogeography, and biogeography. He has conducted about 90 conferences presentations, amazing, including keynote address, and approximately 120 published new species descriptions. Today, Dr. Freytag will talk about biodiversity teaching and research in Southeast Asian European network under the influence of the pandemic. He will focus on some principal methods and technical peculiarities of biodiversity research and instructions practiced by the Biodiversity Research Laboratory of the Ateneo de Manila University. He will also talk about the current modifications under the pandemic situation. We can't wait to the presentations. Professor Hendrik, the mic is yours.
Honorable Minister of Education, distinguished guests and speakers, dear participants and moderators, thanks a lot for this nice opportunity to present in your conference. We have pre-recorded it, and I would recommend to play the pre-recorded video now, and I'm available for questions right after. Thank you. Good day, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present my talk during this conference. I'm Hendrik Freytag of the Ateneo de Manila University, and my presentation is entitled Biodiversity Teaching and Research in a Southeast Asian European Network under the Influence of the Pandemic. First, I would like to introduce you to our main field of studies and specialization. And this is the taxonomy and systematics. As you know, there's somehow an urgent need to study the indigenous fauna and flora, especially in extreme biodiverse areas such as Indonesia or the Philippines, as habitats there are under threat. This is to provide conservation biology with data and arguments, to protect the local biodiversity, and to make biodiversity useful to man by applied science and further studies. The basis for these areas of research is provided by a branch of biology that is known as taxonomy and systematics or biosystematics, a field that classifies, orders, describes, and names taxa, which are the hierarchical units of the tree of life, for instance, species or genera, families, and so on. In special focus of our research is the species diversity in insects. So this diagram actually shows the proposed diversity of all organisms or species on Earth. The numbers that are projected or estimated to exist are actually much higher than seen here. They range from a few million up to 100 million. I would go with this publication that presents a quite realistic estimate of around 8.7 million species, but only around 1.7 million have been described so far. But as you can see here, when it comes to the distribution of the proportions among the different groups of organisms, most of them are insects or the phylum Arthropoda. While on the other hand, we have more specialists for vertebrates, sometimes also plants, but then there are comparably a few taxonomic specialists to deal with this extreme diversity of insects on Earth. So what makes them particularly interesting for study in Southeast Asia is the fact that parts of Southeast Asia and also other parts of the world are so-called biodiversity hotspots. And this refers to the fact that there's a very high rate of species richness and also a high rate of endemism, as what is illustrated in here. But at the same time, those are under a particular threat. Then an area is considered a biodiversity hotspot on a global scale. So here I present two illustrations where you see threat levels indicated by different colors. At the first glance, it might look, these are the identical maps. In fact, they just look very similar as the areas of a certain threat are similar. But then here we refer to biodiversity threats. And below, these are the human water security threats. And what is very obvious and eye-catching is that the areas where these problems occur are almost identical. So the menaces for human and non-human species are actually identical. So when we come to the Philippines, probably the biggest threat for both biodiversity as well as for water security is actually the deforestation, which causes then these effects. This is a map of Negros, and also the years are indicated there. And the originally forested areas have massively being decreased by logging, and by now we find only a very few remnants in some higher mountain ranges. So I would like to introduce my laboratory to you. We are the Ateneo Biodiversity Research Laboratory and have these physical facilities in newly erected building. We have different types of microscopes there, imaging facilities, and then a collection room with dry specimens and freezers for our wet collection. Next door is actually a DNA laboratory that also enables us to do molecular genetic analysis. Very much of our research tasks depends on fieldwork, and therefore we are aiming specifically to include to incorporate students into the ongoing fieldwork and data collection. We do this all over the Philippines, but also have some projects that extend to Borneo, Cambodia, Thailand, and Europe. And in some of these projects, students are also involved. and join us during our expeditions there. So some of the current projects that are ongoing and that are those that incorporate student works, especially theses and projects, is a grant by the university focusing on freshwater biodiversity, surveys in selected Philippine islands, especially those that lack data up to date and are not so well explored. Then we have a long-term project, or it's actually a program, Aqua Palavana. I started that myself as a student around 20 years ago in collaboration with European museums. And yeah, actually it's maintained until now, but we don't receive a permanent funding for this program. So, and a project that recently ended, which was probably quite successful, was the survey and evaluation of rural landscape biodiversity in the island of Mindoro. It was funded by the CHED Commission of Higher Education of the Philippines. Aside from those, there are also some individual small-scale projects by some faculty members. So, some of the core mission of the Athenaean Christian education or the Ignatian formation, since our university is run by a Jesuit, is service learning. So we include students, especially those of our organization, student organization Vox, already in outreach activities, as these were incorporated in the last mentioned project on the island of Mindoro. This includes the community briefing here done by students of Vox, or faculty members brief local indigenous communities about environmental problems, and here particularly the issue of rapid deforestation due to slash and burn practices in this area. But on the other hand, the area in focus is considered a key biodiversity area. So it is very important to maintain the last remaining forests or even extend these forests by projects. Yeah, so we also focus on the so-called rainforestation strategy. This is not just planting of trees, it focuses specifically on the indigenous hardwood trees. In the Southeast Asian tropics, these are mainly dipterocarps, local hardwoods, which are also very important in the network of interactions of different organisms in these tropical forests. So we had a workshop, a briefing workshop for the local communities, then did a survey, which species and how many trees, and for us potential mother trees for the collection of seedlings are still present in the area. To involve not only some men of the communities would actively go out with us into the forest to search for mother trees or collect seedlings. There are also advocacy campaigns, again, done or run by our students of the Vox organization, as seen here and here. For students, for local students, elementary as well as high school students, to sensitize them for this important topic. So we also had trainings for the local political unit administrators at the demonstration site at Visayas State University, and then set up our own nurseries in the area. And we collected wildlings and seeds of those target trees, especially the dipterocarps that I mentioned before, and reared them in our nurseries. So since these dipterocarp trees are very sensitive in their early stage, so it needs special precautions, as you see here, shading, and also like a greenhouse-like construction that is removed later on when they are slowly growing. So, but of course, rearing alone is not the main target. We planted them, first of all, together with community representatives, including the indigenous communities, but also with students, as seen here. However, for the students, we reserved mainly so-called pioneering trees, since the dipterocarps really require very particular conditions, especially shade, and therefore we prefer to plant those high-value trees only with people that are specifically trained for that. So another important feature of our laboratory is the close collaboration with other universities and natural history museums in the Philippines and abroad. This is done in the biodiversity teaching network BioPhil, where several Philippine and also Philippine and Cambodian universities join, as well as the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin as our main partner. In this network, we organize training modules that are incorporated in the regular teaching setup in our universities. We develop these modules jointly. We also have a mobility program where students and young faculty members can visit other institutions of our network for specific trainings or to get access to equipment and facilities that are not available at their own university. So it's very synergetic. And of course, we also aim to come up with joint research projects, co-authored studies, jointly done by members from the different partners. So our own laboratory has a main focus in most of the research papers that are published on integrative taxonomy. This is somehow a new approach of combining traditional morphological approaches that are used to describe species, for instance, or to classify them, to combine those or integrate those with, for instance, DNA barcodes, so molecular genetic data, as well as ecological field observations. This gives a much more comprehensive view of a taxon, for instance, a new species, and more confidence compared to the sole morphological approach, where usually important parts are dissected and then the external look of the organism is described. So to do this biodiversity discovery, what is another word for our pipeline of species descriptions by means of integrative taxonomy, we need, of course, field data. So newly collected specimens. We do this all over the country, but then prerequisite are permits. This is probably the same in Indonesia, and now it is regulated by the Nagoya Protocol that you cannot just go out and collect something. Even if it's an unprotected area, you need to follow certain legal procedures, which includes gratuitous permits in our case and transport permits to do this field collection. I won't go into more detail with that, but then our own collections are not the only source. We also have a historic collection in our own laboratory, and we loan specimens from other institutions. Sometimes they are only loaned from one museum in Europe to our main collaboration partner in Berlin. In some cases, it's also permitted that we bring those loan specimens to the Philippines and return them later on. So the actual activities that we do with these collections is, first of all, a morphological diagnosis. This is somehow traditional taxonomy. We use different microscopes for that, and we dissect important diagnostic characters. For insects, these are mainly the genitals. So actually the copulatory organs, for instance, are the most important character when it comes to the description of new species and to the morphological classification of taxa. So this is then, of course, documented to be incorporated in publications. So we use different imaging technologies with simple cameras attached to a microscope, ocular, up to scanning electron microscopes. Often these images are taken in layers and then stacked together by these softwares combined ZP, for instance, or Helicon Focus, in order to retrieve very sharp images. Yeah, then another important part of traditional morphological taxonomy is also the illustration by scientific drawings. We teach our students to do this in computer applications such as CorelDRAW or Adobe Illustrator, since in very complex structures, the three-dimensional character and also the focus on important structures is much better visible when doing a scientific drawing over having a good microscopic image, especially the three-dimensional character is usually not very well visible. So, but this was only the morphological side. The other track is a molecular genetic analysis. So this is done as standard-wise by extracting the DNA. We commonly use these QIAGEN extraction kits, but there are also other cheaper methods which require then some more time. Depends on the funding that is available. So then they go through a PCR, polymerase chain reaction, to actually finally, or it's the amplification, to allow sequencing by a machine that gives us actually the final sequence of our target gene. So the old gold standard method was Sanger sequencing. This is mainly done in our laboratories, but not exclusively. Of course, not done in our laboratories, but we prepare the data and send it off to a commercial service for the final sequencing step. Yeah, the sequences that we retrieve back are used for phylogenetic analysis. First of all, they need to be aligned, like the identical gene portions from different samples have to be aligned and then processed by various methods. For our integrative taxonomic approach, we use, for instance, molecular species delimitation methods. Some are listed here that are either based on the genetic distance, on coalescent measures of tree, and allow us to conclude, even for cryptic species that look identical morphologically, which are the same and which are different. But then keep in mind, this is only an additional method. It does not replace the morphological descriptions, because it's also by the zoological nomenclature, it's actually demanded that a morphological description is always provided for a new species. Yeah, also to illustrate genetic distance and the genetic structure in populations, we use usually haplotype networks. So we're genetically identical, or at least for our target gene, identical haplotypes can be illustrated then by different colors based on the geographic origin and so on. I won't go into very much detail explaining those. So now I'm going to present some examples from different levels of student education. Some are from bachelor, others are master or even PhD studies, where these protocols are actually implemented by students into their dissertation or thesis work. The last thesis, which was successfully defended just last week, was by now Dr. Delocado, who very successfully assessed the diversity of Philippine limnicid beetles, minute marsh-loving beetles. They are usually found in such debris in running waters, but then they are not submerged. They are just above the water surface, dwelling around these twigs and trees, sometimes also among larger stones. This is their typical habitat, and from there we collect them. And then the student has performed a lot of molecular genetic analysis, which those methods that I mentioned before. And along with a detailed morphological examination, he can come up with proposed new species. Some of them have recently been published. Of course, also the known species, which are not so many actually for the country of the Philippines, might also be retrieved in such sampling and would also be part of such phylogenetic tree, and would also show up as molecular operational taxonomic units. So he also illustrated the diversity and among haplotypes of those by these networks, statistical parsimony networks. And then this goes along with a detailed morphological description, what always includes the drawing of the genital of the species. And here there are two examples of two new species. And I can tell you also this was recently published last week in this paper in Zookis, and we were able to name one of the new species after our former university president, and this was then picked up by several media where these new discoveries were broadcasted. And the nice thing, the beetles are probably not so enigmatic, but then still by a nice background story, they can also make it into the news. Here's another example. So I just noticed an H is missing there. This was a bachelor thesis about minute moss beetles, Hydrenae genus, in this key biodiversity area in Mindoro, where we had our main project that I mentioned before with the rainforestation project. So it is somehow also synergetic. On one hand, these students do outreach there, service learning, but at the same time we use this for their field work that is required to come up with a nice thesis for their bachelor work in this case. So they studied this genus Hydrenae. Originally, no record of the genus was ever known from Mindoro, but on the other hand, we know it's actually a mega diverse genus. In most parts of the world, they occur, but then species are often endemic to certain areas or islands. So they found 5 species, of which 3 were new to science, and they also described this as a result of their bachelor thesis already. And one of them is even a potential bioindicator species, as it is restricted to very specific microhabitats and environmental conditions.
Excuse me, Professor Hendrik.
Published in an international journal, Aquatic Insects, with the description, the formal description of these 3 new species.
Excuse me, Prof. If possible, can you please finish your presentation in 4 minutes? Thank you. There are 4 minutes remaining to present. We expect that you can finish it, Prof, in 4 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's actually a live recording. Maybe those staff of yours who presented can forward it a bit to the last 4 minutes. Thank you.
Versus if we find something nice in YouTube or house backyard activity, such as, for instance, this virtual insect collection based on photographs of specimens encountered around their house and garden. So unfortunately for our teaching network, Biophil, all these face-to-face activities are postponed or currently impossible. Partly, we modified our existing modules for online teaching, but we have not started to produce new modules because actually they were planned for a face-to-face environment. Our internship program was actually postponed due to the travel ban. It seems now by December we can resume with that, and we are expecting the first visiting junior scientists in Berlin Natural History Museum soon. So this might be lifted. I would like to point out what are the other online tools that are used or recommended to be used by our university. For online teaching, we use Canvas for the general course content. In Canvas, we organize a course by modules that might extend for 1 or 2 weeks. And embedded in each module are recorded lectures. These are partly our own lectures, but if we find something nice in YouTube or the internet, we also include external videos if they match our content. It's a bit different how to perform tests and exams. Actually, you can perfectly schedule this in Canvas. You can set the time of availability and the due date, but then it is quite a lot of work to produce various sets of identical questions in order to make sure not every student has the same question, as this would definitely lead to an exchange between the students, and this is not what we want. So the teacher has to create a set with several versions of the questions with different answers, but then the student would only see one of those, which are randomly selected by any algorithm in Canvas. For very practical things like traditionally lab courses, video tutorials are usually needed, and they are recorded in detail by our faculty members and me. The live sessions are usually just once a week per course. For my courses, I practice that the live session is only a discussion of the content of the online delivered video lecture for clarifications and other arrangements, question and answer basically. And of course also thesis or project consultations are held through Zoom. This is our platform for this. In conclusion and in summary, I would say, our field of biodiversity research still depends very much on field data access, and on long term, we could not continue this without the ability to sample and collect specimens in the wild. Also for students that are going to have this specialization track, it is probably very difficult or currently impossible to obtain the practical skills. In theory is the one side, but practical experience is something what is very important for our field of biodiversity research. Also, the handling of real specimens is something what needs practice and training over a long time, and this is very much limited nowadays during the pandemic. For the instructor, it means additional workload since we have to prepare a lot of material in order to enable students to perform at least some basic related experiments and studies. In general, the online instruction has consumed more time compared to face-to-face, at least for me. But then I don't know if this effort in time might reduce later on if same identical courses are used the next following year. So, and all in all, we notice that this sole computer-based work can be quite exhausting, mentally exhausting for both students and faculty. And therefore, we really hope to be back to a regular face-to-face schedule with field trips. Thank you very much. for your attention. I also would like to thank all the collaborators which are part of our network and which have also substantially contributed to our research activities. And in case you want to contact me for any questions, you can find my email address here, and then our university website has this address, and there's another site for our biology department with some detailed introduction to projects and species discoveries. Thank you very much.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big applause to Professor Hendrik for the interesting and informative presentations. Okay, we still have some minutes, so it's now we can ask questions directly to Professor Hendrik, maybe two questions. Yeah, from the chat room, we've got a question from Ibu Ermida Sitorus. Prof. Hendrik, this is the questions. Excuse me, Professor Hendrik Freitag, how can we use or how to use phylogenetic analysis for all species? How to use phylogenetic analysis for all species? I think we hope that this question is relevant.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's actually relevant. I think it refers to those phylogenetic methods that I presented earlier. And I would point out first, like we use it as an additional tool for integrative taxonomy, but they are not, they are not meant as real phylogenetic analysis. It's just that certain species delimitation tools depend on trees, and therefore these trees are produced based on a single gene, usually the mitochondrial DNA CO1 gene, to allow us to distinguish what looks morphologically as one species and what seems to be another one. For real phylogenies that are also sometimes done by the assistance of our faculty members, you need much more data. You need really a large sampling set for a certain group of organisms, probably worldwide. And then more genes than just this one mitochondrial barcode gene. Probably you also would include nuclear genes, and you would have a much larger data set to conclude on the real deep phylogenetic relationships of a certain group of organisms. And then what we are not doing is like the very deep phylogeny of the early evolution of all different branches of life. Those things are also published, but then, this is not a focus of our laboratory.
All right, thank you. I hope it answers the questions of Ibu Sitorus. Committee, any more questions in the chat room? No more? One more, yeah. From Prof. Marina Silalahi, Southeast Asia is one of the location in which Indonesia is a part of Southeast Asia. Considering that UKI have students from all of Indonesian areas, from many islands in Indonesia, is it possible to collaborate in research? Possibly to collaborate with Professor Hendrik institutions, something like that. Possibly that is the questions. Yeah. In research, module development, especially in biodiversity, because UKI has a biology teaching study program. That's the questions. I hope you got it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, of course. Collaboration is a very important thing, as I pointed out before. Currently, we have no active joint research programs with partners in Indonesia, but we attended already conferences in Indonesia on biodiversity and evolution and such things. And of course, we are very open for any collaboration. The thing is, all of this needs to be formalized. We need memoranda of agreement and stuff. And as I mentioned also before, there are also legal requirements when we are going to work or deal with biodiversity field data. So if ever it needs new collections, then the local counterpart has to assure that all the legal pre-requirements are fulfilled. But generally, we are very open for collaboration. We are also very interested in the fauna, insect fauna of Indonesia, for instance. As I mentioned my contact information there, I think there's a nice opportunity. You just send me an email and then we can go into more detail how collaboration is possible. But in general, yes, as we are doing it already with Cambodia and University Brunei Darussalam and so on.
Okay. Yeah. One more question, Prof. Hendrik from Ibu Masta. One questions, but there is also some sub questions. Okay.
Okay.
That means the question is more than one. How to teach biodiversity, tropical biodiversity to students during the pandemic and possibly also after that. So post under pandemic era and post pandemic. Second, how to manage. Can you describe a good management of home laboratory? That means, and then number 3, based on research you ever conducted, is there any differences between Indonesian and Philippines biodiversities? So is there differences between biodiversities in those two countries? So 3 questions, Prof.
Yeah, thanks. These questions are very good because this is actually the part which was missed out of my presentation due to the time constraints. It was actually part of my presentation, but then we had not enough time. During the pandemic, yeah, we actually have a serious problem. So we focus students' work mainly on this molecular genetic side, as the analysis of these data can be done at home if ever you have a computer ready and the software installed. So this is not a big problem, but any kind of field work is of course not possible anymore. As a replacement for field work, we introduced something like the virtual insect collection. So students are asked to just go around their house and garden, take a picture of things, but also take note of what might be important for the identification of these insects, what they photograph around their home. And then, yeah, to identify this and provide proper labels. This is not a proper replacement of an actual field trip, but at least it's something a little bit field related. Yeah. But the main problem is actually to train students to develop these skills handling such small insect organisms under a real microscope, as most of the students won't have a microscope at home. We were able now at least to get a funding for thesis students that they will get small microscopes that they can bring home and they can also study things at home. But for the entire class, it won't be possible this way. Yeah, so the home lab is just possible or successful for everything what is sole computer based, and this is mainly the DNA analysis, the molecular genetic part. Difference between Philippines and Indonesia. On the higher taxonomic levels, let's say the occurrences of families, sometimes even genera of organisms, it's quite similar. Also, Indonesia has more islands, and it also reaches almost up to the Australasian realm of organisms. Of course, Indonesia has more diversity than the Philippines. But then in general, the fauna is similar, but when it comes to species level, you have so many island endemic species that only occur on one particular island. So of course, on that level, it's different from the Philippines. The species are mainly not exactly the same. I hope this is answered.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Hendrik. And ladies and gentlemen, it seems the longer the hotter here, but we have a very limited time. So if you still have questions, you can write it down on the chat room, and then the committee will collect and send it to Professor Hendrik. We believe that he will answer it. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand once again to the nice presentation of Professor Hendrik. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was an honor.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now prepare ourselves to listen to the third presentations. The third presenter is Dr. Brian D. Denman. Before the presentation starts, I would like to provide some more information about Dr. Brian. He is an associate professor of teaching, learning, and assessment at the University of New England, Amydale, where he teaches applied leadership and comparative and international education. He also serves as departmental head of globalization, leadership, and policy, and is the Secretary General of Global CIE. His current research interests focus on personalized assessments, visualizing educational data for research and policy makers, and international university cooperations. He is now directing an innovative interinstitutional initiative to teaching and learning by employing an alternative online assessment tool called Personal Assessment Tool, or PAT, to master's degree students in the Asia Pacific. Through his work on PAT, Denman hopes to broaden the discourse about educational quality through personalized assessment, while enabling universities and other educational institutions to better evidence student learning and teaching. Ladies and gentlemen, today, Dr. Brian will talk about personalized assessment tool, or PAT. This is very important because, there is a general assumption that wisdom and practices of university teaching, learning, and assessment, especially in today's post-COVID world, are changing. However, many of the wisdom and practices are not evolving to meet individual or societal needs of working world. Now, Dr. Denman will address this by talking about current international university research on the personalized learning tool that attempts to identify, benchmark, track, and scaffold higher order skills within the learning of the required curriculum content. We hope Dr. Berman's talk will help us understand what PAT is and how PAT facilitates students to personalize their learning experience through online learning analytics in a post-COVID world. Dr. Derman, the forum is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the hosts to give me this wonderful opportunity to speak. In this COVID world that we currently live in, I am blessed with the opportunity to live or actually do some study in Germany. So I can reminisce with Professor Freitag. Because I'm currently in Tübingen, Germany right now, developing an international agreement with them, but also on a sabbatical at Stockholm University. But I live and reside in Australia. And for all of you, apa kabar? I remember my time in Indonesia in the 1980s fondly. I am honored by given this opportunity to speak. To segue from Professor Freitag's presentation to mine, I want to try and help people understand that the PAT is not atypical to what we would call a taxonomy, but on humans as opposed to on flora and fauna. And we can't do this with genetic testing per se, but we can do it in terms of psychometric testing. And so the PAT or the PAT that I've developed hopefully will give you some idea as to what we could possibly do in a post-COVID world. Now I'm going to share my screen now, so I hope it's all right with you, but I'm going to speak to my presentation, my PowerPoint presentation, so you're not going to see my face, but you'll probably hear me. Is everything understood in terms of the way I'm speaking? And I'm assuming that I have approximately, say, 30 minutes. I'll try and do this as quickly as possible so that we have time for questions and answers. So without further ado, I'd like to try and give you some understanding as to how this came about. So in the 1990s, there was a lot of work undertaken around the world on globalization, but there was not a lot of talk about how we are creating the global thinker. And so I wanted to try and look at what the bridges and barriers are to how we are creating the global thinker in a 21st century world. And so I put it into 4 different frames, and these 4 frames are the issue of exclusivity versus inclusivity, where there are some institutions that are wanting to become more exclusive and others that want to become more inclusive. And there are examples below that show why or how they are evidencing their perspective. From an ideological representation versus pragmatism, we are seeing signs in literature that we are moving away from equilibrium theories to more and more conflict theories. So in the 1990s, when I was studying globalization, there was a strong emphasis on convergence, on how we as a society, as a world society, can converge to improve standardization, improve quality standards. But as globalization is waning, we are seeing more signs of fragmentation, and this is resulting in what we call conflict theories. And I'll be speaking more about anarchistic utopianisms that are currently taking part on a worldwide scale, not just in the Asia-Pacific sphere. Then we have the issue of positivism versus cultural relativity. And I hearken back to a very famous presentation in 1965 between Hans Kuhn and Karl Popper that focused on the scientific method. And this was the most important aspect of research quality at the time, but we are finding that we are becoming increasingly polarized by those that are qualitativists and those that are quantitativists. And that is representative in the positivism versus cultural relativity. Then last, dissonance and convergence. We are moving away from using international surveys such as PISA, TIMSS, and PEARLS. And we're seeing signs of questions about a miseducation, the idea that we are teaching creativity out of the student, and we are looking at cognitive versus cultural dissonance, and we're not recognizing the importance of localization as opposed to globalization. So in a COVID world, what we have found is that the change that has taken place on a worldwide scale is requiring that people languish back into their comfort zones and not impose new directives, new initiatives, new change, because they, generally speaking, find that it's out of their comfort zone. We're also finding students are not really sharing a lot with new ideas. So there's been a stagnation of ideas as a result of COVID. And at the same time, universities are struggling to find ways in which to keep these students interested and engaged in their degrees. So a lot of institutions around the world are now starting to think about institutional resets. How are we going to retain our students? How are we going to look at student retention? How can we provide an education for a job market where we don't really necessarily know what type of jobs are going to be available in a post-COVID world? Now, as you can hear from the accent, I'm originally from the United States, but I've lived in Australia for now 24 years. And I come from what is called the Chicago model. This is where, for undergraduates, the first 2 years are exploratory, and students have the opportunity to test the waters of certain degrees. And then once they find something of interest, then they specialize so that they can get an actual bachelor's degree. But in Australia, it tends to represent more of a British residential model where the academic attempts to mold and shape the student over time. And so there's a very strong relationship between the academic and the student. And there is now a blending or blurring effect that's taking place between those two models. Having been here in Europe for just 3 months, I've noticed a blurring effect between what is called the Humboldtian Research University model, which is based on research, and the French Grande École model, which is based on merit. So these two approaches or models are also seeing a blurred effect, but the two aspects of these two models is that the emphasis is placed on the early admission of students who have very high academic achievement in high schools. And so the merit is based on the selection of those students going to university. And in the Humboldtian research model, the emphasis is placed on the essence of
Yeah, possibly Dr. Brian has a problem in internet connections. So what do you think, committee? We are going to wait for some more minutes? Yeah, we are going to wait in about 5 more minutes. We expect that Dr. Brian's connection will be okay again. Yeah, while you are waiting for Dr. Brian, possibly you can play the dancing video or something else. Yeah, we expect that the connection will be recovered again soon. And while we're waiting for that, possibly, ladies and gentlemen, you can write questions to Prof. Brian on the chat room. So as soon as he finished talking, we can go to the question and answer sessions later.
Ya, ini kita UKI, berdiri sejak lebih dari 50 tahun lalu untuk menciptakan generasi penerus bangsa, generasi yang mempunyai visi dan mampu bersaing di era perkembangan teknologi yang semakin pesat. Menghasilkan generasi tersebut, kami membagi bidang pendidikan menjadi beberapa jurusan. Program studi doktor hukum, program studi doktor pendidikan agama Kristen, dan program magister dengan pilihan program studi magister pendidikan.
Okay, thanks God. We finally reconnect with Prof. Brian. Yeah, Prof. Denman, you can proceed your presentations possibly in at least 15 more minutes. I hope you can buy that. Thank you.
My apologies. I don't know how much you heard, but I think I'll just finish the presentation with a video clip so that it gives you a better idea as to what we've attempted to try and do at UNE.
Yeah, it's up to you which one is better.
Okay, I'll be doing this video.
All right.
So hopefully this video will help explain it. Okay. Here you go.
I will not be pushed. Index brief, debrief, or numbers.
Is everyone able to see the presentation?
Yeah, it is visible, quite clear.
The relative stability and continuity of the 20th century has been disrupted. Its rate of change now seems almost glacial, having been outstripped in just a decade by the fast-paced world of today's instantaneous information age. In the 21st century, a constant state of flux and change is the norm. As educators, we need to consider whether we are equipping our graduates to live and succeed in a world of constant, rapid change. Remember the old adage, give a man a fish and feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and feed him for a lifetime? Perhaps. Unless, of course, the fish run out or the technique for catching them stops working for some reason. In a world where things are constantly changing, the knowledge we hold today may be meaningless tomorrow. The question is, how do we prepare our graduates for a job that does not even exist yet? Just learning how to fish is no longer enough. They need to learn to conceive of a new way to catch fish when the time arises. To be job ready and employable in tomorrow's world, future graduates will need to be far more flexible in their thinking. They will have to be more innovative, be ingenious with problem solving, and able to critically assess information and convey their ideas in meaningful and informative ways. And they will need to be able to see the opportunities presented by change and transfer these skills across the multiple careers that they're likely to have. So, what if skills such as creativity and innovation could be measured and tracked? What if we had better evidence to identify and address knowledge gaps? What if academic staff had the tools to not only track student progress, but to help build potential, capacity and ability with a personalised study program? What if academics could evaluate their own approach to assessment and marking techniques? What if students had a way of taking greater control and ownership of their learning of these skills? What if graduates had a way of evidencing these skills for employers? In a knowledge society, graduates are not only expected to have technical and discipline competencies, but also to demonstrate skills such as teamworking, communication, leadership, critical thinking, problem solving, and managerial abilities. In a recent survey, 82% of employers considered these sorts of employability skills the most important factor when recruiting graduates. Yet, 61% report that graduates haven't developed appropriate work skills during their education. And up to 30% of the employers were not satisfied with graduates' use of creative thinking to develop appropriate solutions to problems. This should be a key outcome of higher education. Over the next 3 to 5 years, these employers expect to need more people with leadership and management capability and other higher order skills. Employers will increasingly be looking for more direct certification or evidencing of these skills. Universities of the future that base their reputation around their approach to individualised assessment and the employability skills of their students will be able to present a strong, differentiated brand image and an advantage for their graduates. The DJR is a tool designed to easily record study undertaken and the type and level of skill in various domains to provide a snapshot profile of student study progress and skill acquisition. For example, the DJR provides information that can help to mould and shape the potential of individuals, allowing an academic to guide struggling students to success or to extend high-achieving students. The goal is to supplement assessment scores with detailed, personalised feedback to enhance learning and correct any misinterpretations. This includes suggestions of further study options that can be personalised for each student to address gaps in their skills profile or extend their learning. The DJR will empower students to take control of their own learning by providing personalised feedback that evidences their skill, identifying gaps in their skills profile, and suggesting ways to improve their profile or extend their knowledge. For the academic, the advantage of the DJR is that it can be used to open a closer dialogue with their colleagues, to evaluate changes in a course, to identify shortfalls and inconsistencies in assessment or marking, or to assess the impact of an intervention or changes in content or assessment methods. It will also assist with degree development by highlighting gaps across the entire degree. The DJR is a smartphone app that can be customised to suit different courses and tailored to meet different institutional and organisational needs. The DJR is a very versatile tool that can foster stronger teaching.
So that was a very quick and dirty example of what the PAD has done. Let me try and give you an understanding of how this actually has materialized over the last 10 years. I've tested this in both Australia and China, and we were able to find significant difference in cultural groups, which was not something that we were anticipating. And initially, the goal was to showcase or celebrate what regional and rural Australia was doing in comparison to urban Australia. So we wanted to give our students in regional rural Australia a heads up on the strengths that they were able to we were able to identify to help give them a new perspective on their educational upbringing. And it was quite significant, particularly for our Aboriginal students who scored very highly in creativity and reflective thinking. In fact, it was almost off the charts with both of those attributes. And the Aboriginal students were identifying that this was the first time that they were actually acknowledged for the education that they have picked up over their lifetime in oral traditions. We were also able to find difference between our Inner Mongolian students and our Han students in China. And this was also very significant statistically. But unlike Professor Freitag's presentation on the understanding of genomics, this is more psychometric type testing. And it's designed in such a way that allows the student to customize their personal learning journey. And as a result of this, Stockholm and Tübingen in 2 different countries are quite interested in rolling this out at their institutions to see if we could find differences in culture, in institutional differences, and in disciplinary differences. But the overarching goal in this was just to customize or personalize the learning journey for our students. I'm sorry for the technological glitches, but I will end my presentation with that. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big hand to Dr. Denman. Actually, for me, myself, and even for most of us, since PAT or PAT is a new assessment idea, new assessment tool, this presentation might have triggered new, what is it? Might have inspired us in order to get more about it. But we expect that the committee will publish the paper soon so that we can read it completely. All right, now it's time for question and answer. And we have got one question from Professor. The question is from Professor Freitag. Dr. Brian Denman, you mentioned about historic principles and schools of education. What is your opinion about teaching just following intuition without following strict principles? Is there a potential advantage because a teacher might be more authentical then? That is the questions.
It's a very good question, Professor Freitag. When I designed this diagnostic tool, it was with the understanding that I would not be able to venture into the territory of one's expertise as an academic. So if one is a genetic engineer or a genetic scientist, there are specific or strict rules and core competencies that one has to attain in order to receive a qualification in that particular discipline. What this PAT does is it's a supplementary diagnostic tool. It's not meant to integrate into a letter grade or a numeric grade for the core competencies. It's a supplemental assessment. It generally tends to take about 15 minutes extra per student. But if one is tracking poorly, particularly, let's say, a first-year student in biology, chemistry, or math, this diagnostic tool helps identify when problems start to surface. And so it's a great retention tool, and students have found this tool to be quite useful in helping get the advice that they need or supervision that they need. I hope I answered your question.
All right, thank you. Yeah, one more questions. Dr. Denman, you mentioned, this is the last questions, the previous questions. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, while waiting for the questions, I myself would like to say that Dr. Denman, this is a brandly new, and you said that actually PAT can be used in any subjects, in any discipline. Can you please inform us and recommend literature in order to get it, to know it deeper, to know PAT deeper? Thank you.
Okay, so PAT or PAT is what we're now starting. It's a learning analytics tool, and many universities around the world, many educational institutions are starting to reset their structures in order to provide these learning analytic tools. The beauty of the PAT is it's designed specifically to allow each academic to continue on their good work and expertise in their own disciplines, and to then use the PAT to help better understand how their students are actually tracking in their course. There's a lot of new information out there on learning analytics. It's a blossoming field. It's in what we would call the learning of science. And it has a lot of new a groundswell of interest and intrigue by many institutions around the world. The beauty of the PAT is, again, it transitions nicely with the way we've developed structures in the past. So it can be integrated fairly easily. It is not something that is too overwhelmingly difficult in terms of technology. But we have found that there are a whole host of institutions that are wanting to use the PAT to help broaden the scope of what I call the global thinker. And I think we all, as educators, want our students to succeed in life. But if we can create a global, spatial, lateral thinker in this world, particularly in a post-COVID world, I think we will have made our mark.
Okay, thank you. And probably this is the last question, and it will be addressed directly by Ibu Aci Purnamasari. Okay, time is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Sir Parlin. Well, good evening, Professor Brian. So is PAT can be used for the other subjects? I mean, like certain subject, like kind of assessment tools or something? Is it like that, or how? To implement to some other subjects, especially in the university level. As one background information I would like to share to you is, like right now in Indonesia, we apply a kind as like freedom learning, like Merdeka Belajar. So our government let the students join some of other like field activities that they directly joined and contribute to the society. And then all of their works there will be converted into some credits in the university subjects. So actually, that's kind of learning will absolutely support the students' need for their demands when they graduate from the university related to their soft skills. But how about the content knowledge that the subjects directly converted into that kind of activity? So maybe you can give
a little bit information or explain more about how to use the PAT and how to give some ideas about this kind of assessment to the students. Thank you so much. Anyway, I'm Angela from the Christian University of Indonesia. Yeah, thank you.
Angela, nice. Thank you very much. I appreciate for the question. First and foremost, the 5 attributes that I was identifying initially with the PAT are those attributes that employers say teachers generally lack when they graduate from the university. So the 5 attributes that we were able to identify for education are creativity, communication, analytical thinking, problem solving, and reflective thinking. But if we were to look at Professor Freitag's example earlier in the sciences, the sciences may not necessarily want to focus on these 5 attributes. And the way the PAT has been designed, it allows for each discipline to change to what is required or what is necessary for employment in the local environment. And so it's quite a useful tool to then be used for each and every discipline. And it doesn't require a lot of extra work, but in essence, we want to just ensure that when we look at the psychometric testing of certain higher order skills, that we develop the characteristics that fit within what we call a roadmap. And this roadmap has been designed specifically by neurologists who have neuromapped creativity into 9 stages. So if, for purposes of just making it easy to understand for creativity, we have on the very, very left-hand side of the continuum, the aha moment, which is called full automaticity. And on the full right-hand side of the continuum, it's full consciousness. And there are 9 stages, and not every academic needs to know that information, but it's been properly roadmapped so that when we start seeing characteristics in one's work, it actually showcases where the trajectory is for that individual, and we can then provide proper advice and counsel to those students.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor, for the explanation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we still have 1 question, and this is the last because actually we've got the time limit. So, Dr. Denman, this is the last question. Higher education in Indonesia is quite linear. The multidisciplinary approach seems very rare. The question is to maintain the unpredictable, or meaning to say, possibly the writer or the person, the question means that to enable students to adapt to the unpredictable future, what is your suggestions? Once again, in Indonesia, higher education systems and practice seems very linear, not multidisciplinary. What your suggestions so that we can equip our students to the unpredictable future? Thank you.
It's a very good question. And if I had a very simple answer, I would be wanting to say that we don't know, but I think the best way to describe this is that if, let's say, we had 2 universities in Indonesia that wanted to participate in the PAT, what you would find is that while the system is linear and perhaps maybe very, very rigid in terms of academic approach, the PAT actually offers the opportunity to differentiate the student in terms of their skills. So if they were to graduate with a master's degree in education from 2 universities, University A and University B, the PAT would not only provide a transcript and a diploma in a master's degree diploma, but it would also provide a very highly sophisticated example of the strengths of that student and the flexibility, the adaptability based on their strengths, whether it be creativity or abstract thinking. And so it is quite useful in terms of trying to find a job once you finish a degree at that university, whether it be A or B.
Thank you, Dr. Denon. All right, Excellencies, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, we finally arrive at the end of this second plenary sessions. In these sessions, we have listened to 3 essential and interesting topics from 3 outstanding speakers. And we, the committee, expect that these 3 presentations manage to inspire you all, or at least widen your horizon about higher learning in the post-COVID-19 era. So thanks, and let's give a big hand, a big applause once again to Dr. Salah Trolley, Professor Hendrik Freitag, and Dr. Brian Denon. Thank you once again. And I return the mic to the committee.
Thank you very much for the wonderful and inspiring session with our invited speakers and our moderator. We believe this session will be beneficial for our knowledge as well as our practices. And thank you for those who have actively participated by asking some questions and giving some comments, both in Zoom, online website, and YouTube channel of FKIP UKI Hebat. You can also rewatch our day 1 and day 2 of ICSES 2021 in our YouTube channel. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us hear a closing statement by the Vice Rector for Academic Affairs of Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Wilson Rajaguguk, MSc MA. The floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, salam sejahtera. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Om Swastiwastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I believe that during these 2 days, all of us have obtained a fruitful discussion. In this third ICES, whose main theme is research and education sustainability post-COVID-19 in Asian context, we have learned a lot from the keynote and invited session delivered by amazing keynote and invited speaker. Once again, on behalf of Universitas Kristen Indonesia, I do say thank you for delivering such important materials so that all of us can deepen our knowledge about design research. Furthermore, I would like to thank all presenters and participants who have joined this conference from all over the world. I'm certain that every presenter has presented the application of design research and education research. I sincerely hope that through your presentation and discussion afterwards, all of us can contribute to solving the education problems in our own countries. Even though the contribution may be small, but it is still valuable. Finally, I would like to thank all of the committee members for organizing this conference and ensuring that it proceeded smoothly. I would also like to apologize for any inconvenience due to my experience during this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I like to emphasize that when there is a meeting, then there will be goodbye. I'm certain that you are all looking forward to getting back to your respective activities. So I thank you once again for your participation and wish you all a safe and healthy, moreover in the current situation, namely COVID-19. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita. Om Santi Santi Om, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. God bless all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Wilson Rajaguguk. Dear ladies and gentlemen, now we will have a photo session. For all of the participants, please kindly open your camera. So we will have a photo session together with our invited speakers today, as well as our Vice Rector and the Dean and Vice Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education. To Dr. Wilson Rajaguguk, please come in front on the stage. Then we will have a photo session together. Also to the Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, to Dr. Randa Sunarto, please come in front. And we will have a photo session together. To Vice Dean of Teacher Training and Education Faculty, Mr. Gunawan. Okay, and all of the committees, the head of third ICES committees and the rest of the committees, please come in front. You can have a photo session together here. And once again, to all of the participants in Zoom meeting, please kindly open your camera. Then we will have a screenshot and pictures together. To Pendeta Stefanus, you can also come in front. Thank you very much. Mr. Parlin, our moderator for today. Thank you. Okay, so we will have a picture now. I will count. First slide, 3, 2, 1. Smile, please. Okay, we have multiple layers today. So next slide, please. Smile, please. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I can't see Professor Freitag there. If you are still online with us, Professor, could you please turn on your camera? Okay, next slide, please. 3, 2, and 1. Okay, next slide. 3, 2, 1. Okay, you can have different style for the pictures, offline pictures here. Okay, next. 3, 2, 1, smile, please. You can have your freestyle, please, here. Next slide, please. 3, 2, 1. Could you please show your thumb for all of us here? 3, 2, 1. Smile, please. Is there any other slide there? Okay, we still have to smile. Please be patient. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Smile, please. Okay, is that enough for the slides? Okay, here, smile, please, sir. 3, 2, 1. Okay. I think we have to keep the safety. Once more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much. Give big applause to all of us here. Thank you so much to our Vice Rector, Dr. Wilson. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we will have a closing prayer, which will be led by Pastor Stephanus MTH. This prayer will be led in a Christian way, so for the other beliefs, please pray according to your religion. To Pastor Stephanus, the time is yours.
Baik, Bapak Ibu, kita akan mengakhiri seminar internasional kita di sore hari ini. Kita akan menutupnya dalam doa. Mari kita berdoa. Kami bersyukur kepada Tuhan yang selalu menyayangi, mengasihi, dan menolong kami, terutama selama 2 hari kami berada dalam kegiatan seminar internasional yang diselenggarakan oleh Fakultas Keguruan dan Ilmu Pendidikan Universitas Kristen Indonesia. Kami percaya penyertaan Tuhan selalu ada, sehingga kegiatan ini bisa berjalan dengan baik, yang juga diikuti oleh peserta yang banyak. Kami bersyukur setiap materi yang sudah dibagikan dan setiap kami yang telah mengikuti dan menanggapi, mendapatkan banyak informasi masukan terkait dengan pengetahuan keilmuan kami dalam dunia pendidikan. Tuhan memberkati seluruh presenter, seluruh pemakalah, dan juga Tuhan memberkati seluruh panitia yang telah bekerja dengan giat mempersiapkan seluruh rangkaian acara. Semua pengisi-pengisi acara yang melengkapi, menyempurnakan kegiatan ini menjadi lebih baik, lebih meriah. Kiranya Tuhan juga memberkati mereka semua. Kami juga berdoa untuk Universitas Kristen Indonesia yang memberikan dukungan sangat baik untuk menyelenggarakan kegiatan ini. Berkatilah Universitas Kristen Indonesia agar Universitas Kristen Indonesia dapat melakukan kegiatan-kegiatan yang serupa, bahkan lebih baik lagi. Kami mengakhiri semua ini mengucapkan syukur atas kasih dan penyertaan Tuhan. Kiranya Tuhan selalu memberkati hidup kami, memberikan kami kemampuan, memberikan kami kesehatan, agar kami bisa memuliakan Tuhan lewat hidup kami. Terpujilah Engkau dari kini dan untuk selama-lamanya. Dalam nama Yesus Kristus kami berdoa. Amin.
Thank you very much to Pastor Stephanus. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your active participation during our first and second day of International Conference on Education and Science 2021. Let us be guided by all the things we have learned and heard together in this international conference, and we are able to use and influence our future. We also really thank our best speakers, presenters for this conference, and thank you for the valuable inspiration and knowledge which is shared with us. Please give a big round of applause to all of us here. Thank you very much. And before we part, let me share this verse for us. This is a very common verse for in Indonesian event. Kalau ada jarum yang patah, jangan disimpan di dalam peti. Kalau ada silap dan salah, harap sudi maafkan kami. Which roughly means, please forgive us for our shortcomings. For your information, the e-certificate will be shared through your registered email address. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm Angela, and all of the committee of the third ICES 2021 would like to see you again in our next international conference. Please stay tuned with up-to-date information from us. So please follow our social media from our Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at FKIP UKI Hebat. Thank you very much, and may God bless all of us. Bye-bye, and see you again. Sayonara. Thank you.